Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and we're studying Joshua chapter 2 today. So, in Joshua chapter 2, we know that we set up last week that all the people came through the camp. Joshua sent some leaders of his through the camp and said, you know what, in 3 days we're crossing over the Jordan. But before they did that, he actually sent out two spies. Now, he himself, and Caleb was actually two spies that were sent out by Moses a little while back to also spy out the land. And so this was whenever they came back and said, yes, we can take the land. But all the other spies said, no, these people were giants before us. There's no way we could be able to conquer them. And so if you go back and read Numbers chapter 13 through 14, it kind of talks about how Joshua was the spy and they came back, and partially also why Joshua became one of the leaders. And because he was one of the courageous ones, and in chapter 2, Joshua does the same thing. He knows that he was in leadership because of that, partially because of his faithfulness to God and knowing that God was going to be with him. But also, we know that Joshua thought it was a good idea. So he sent out two spies, and so we'll just start reading in chapter 2. And Joshua the son of Nun sent two men secretly from Shittim as spies, saying, go view the land, especially Jericho. And they went and came into the house of the prostitute, whose name was Rahab, and lodged there. And it was told to the king of Jericho, behold, men of Israel have come here tonight, and to search out the land. Then the king of Jericho sent to Rahab, saying, bring out the men who have come to you, who entered your house, for they have come to search out the land. But the woman had taken the two men and hid them. And she said, true, the men had came here, but I did not know where they came from. And when the gate was about to be closed at dark, the men went out. I do not know where the men went. Pursue them quickly before you overtake them. But she had brought them up to the roof and hid them with the stalks of flax that she had laid in there on the roof. So the men pursued them after on the way. So the men pursued after them on the way to the Jordan as far as the forts, and the gate was shut as soon as pursuers had gone. So we see that Rahab decided to make a decision. Rahab knew that people of the land had heard about them. They had heard about that they were, that they had kind of overthrown Egypt, that their God was allowing them to overthrow Egypt, and that Egypt being one of the bigger civilizations at the time, this was kind of scary because Jericho was certainly not anything as big as Egypt was. And so when we look at this, we look and see some amazing things that Rahab really discovered and then took advantage of at that moment. In verses 2 and 3, we see somehow the king was informed that the men from Israel had come into the land to search it out. Now, it's funny because they were spies, and maybe they weren't necessarily good spies, but they did search out the land. However, they were discovered somehow. Somehow, someone knew that these were people from Israel and that they were to be found out. They were going to need to be captured. So the king sent people to Rahab asking if she would bring them out. The men... and they even came into her house. So someone must have seen them. They definitely were discovered. However, Rahab hid them and told a little bit of a fable, you could say, in trying to protect the spies that Joshua had sent. And so if they would have been sent, they would obviously probably been killed and they would have been captured and stuff. So in verses 4 and 5, we see Rahab made a choice to hide the two spies, and she hid them, and the Rahab told the officials that the gate was about to be closed, but if they hurried, that they could capture them. But they snuck out right before the gate was closed. So go after them, go for them, because you can catch them. And so Rahab made that decision. But in verses 6 and 7, we see Rahab took the spies on the roof and hid them behind the stalks of flax. Flax was a material that was made it was put together to be made of a certain linen, and so just stacks of it were drying on top of her roof. So she kind of put the guys underneath them and just laid them on top of them so they wouldn't see them. And so and being this here, this would have been something she would have been involved with. There's no reason to have flax stalks on your roof for no reason. So it's probably something that she was doing almost as a side business. So seeing them up there, even if they did go to the roof, which it seemed like the officials didn't, however, this could have been something that they would have been like, oh yeah, she does this, so it's fine. Now, there is arguments about if she really was a prostitute or not. really, whenever you look up the language, whenever you look up the word, it definitely means a prostitute of some sort. However, how much that could have been, a professional, just an adulterous person, we don't really know. We do know that people like prostitutes, and in her case, she obviously owned this home of some sort. It could have been something kind of like an inn or like a hotel. And where would you go? Consider all the Western movies, okay? Now, this is a side trail, but think about all the Western movies that you've ever seen. Where do the people go to go get information, right? When they're riding into town, they go to the saloon, which is also usually what? It's a hotel. It's like a bar hotel, and a lot of times there's prostitutes there. So if the spies were searching out the land, they could have actually went into this place, could have been a hotel. We can't know that for sure. We're just speculating, but just formulating a story here. If they did go there, they could have been going to her for information to understand how, where the armies are at and how the city is built up by fortress, fortified and stuff. So we don't really know. But however, she probably was someone that did know a lot of information. Prostitutes certainly was able to get a little bit more information for reasons we won't go into. But we do know that she definitely was a prostitute. This was not a woman of much nobility, for sure. Not probably a wealthy person. However, this one prostitute made a decision to hide these spies, and she saved her entire family. And because of that, because of her faithfulness, seeing who the God of Israel was, and then kind of putting her faith in this God, that, hey, look, I've dealt with kindly. Could you save me? That God actually allowed her to be grafted into the very lineage of Jesus and King David. Only 3 or 4 grandchildren away was King David. And that's amazing. And so we see that Rahab really took advantage of this moment and saw a need, and she took care of it. Now, what's interesting, I did not know this while studying this. It says in verse 7, so the men pursued them after them on the way to the Jordan as far as the fords. Now, I didn't know what a fords was. I kind of think I have always looked at that as a fort with a T instead of a D at the end. So, I don't know, just as far as the forts, wherever they were. No, this is actually a fords, and I looked it up. It's interesting. I did not know a ford was a shallow place in a river. So whenever you go to a river, it's a very, very shallow place, a little spot where it's, just shallow in certain places. That's called a ford. So when you look at it and understand, it said that they were pursuing them after them on the way to the Jordan. Now remember, Israel is on the other side of the Jordan. They haven't passed over yet. So it's interesting how the people knew why Rahab told them to hide out for a little while, is because they knew the people were going to where they would have been crossing over anyway. And so they knew these people would have known all the fords of the Jordan River so that they could cross easily with their armies or with caravans or whatever. And so the people that were pursuing them knew we needed to get to one of those shallow places because that's where the men are going to cross anyway. So let's go to the Jordan to try to catch up to him, because it says people of Israel have came to see. So somehow they knew as well where the spies were coming from. So we know Israel could be over there. Let's go to the fords to try to cut them off and take them so they won't get back to their people. Interesting little point. I've never known that before. And so they traveled with the fords and try to get to them after the gate was closed. Now in verse 8, it says, before the men lay down, she came up to them and said to them, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that fear of you has fallen upon us, and all the inhabitants of the land melt away before you. Interesting point to really note right there. The people of the Egyptians, some people trading, coming in, seeing Egypt fallen from all of the plagues, who knows what. Somehow this information has gotten back to Jericho and some of the people of the land. And Rahab even knows about this. So information has gotten that, hey man, these people, they're out in the middle of the desert. They don't really have a home. But let me tell you something. Their God is real and he's powerful. And we have to do something about it. And so, but the thing is, fear had fallen upon them. So it already had gotten back to Rahab even that these people were scared of them. And so fear had fallen on the land, all of their inhabitants of the land melt away before you. Now look at this in verse 10. For we have heard now the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan. Okay, they have already heard multiple civilizations have fallen from the people of Israel because the Lord God that they serve and the God, the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea, and then the king of the Amorites and the Og of Sihon, whom you devoured to destruction. The end of verse 10. So there is word out that look, these people they're not messing around. The God is leading them. There is a real, true God leading them, and we got to look out for them. So when these spies are heard, hey, these same people are looking at our city now. That's why the king immediately sent people to pursue them and to take them, because they knew, hey, if these people get back to their land, yeah, we can take Jericho. It was only a matter of time. And so there's a real reason why they just pursued them like this. And so in verse 11, and as soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no spirit left in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God, in the heavens above and on the earth beneath. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that I have dealt kindly with you. You also will deal kindly with my father's house, and give me a sure sign that you will save alive my father and mother, my brother and sister, and all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death. And the men said to her, our lives for yours, even to death. If you do not tell this business of ours, then when the Lord gives us the land, we will deal kindly and faithfully with you. So then she let them down by a rope through the window of her house, was built into the city wall, that she lived in the wall. And so these guys, look, I mean, it seems as though she's probably the only one at this house at this time. So the men come in, but she obviously didn't have anyone else, or they would have kind of had to deal with multiple people. So the thing is, they could have killed her. You consider that. The Lord is helping them kind of get through the land and conquer these people. Now, he let a lot of people go, but however, he was sending them through to conquer land. He could have killed Rahab and jumped out the window, and they'd have been gone. However, because of the kindness that she dealt with them, there's obviously something that was happening within her life. And they must have saw it, and she knew that something was going on. So she pleaded with them, hey, I've dealt kindly with you. When you come take over the city, would you deal kindly with me? I know that the Lord your God is true. And so they made a deal. Yes, we will deal kindly with you. You have heard the Lord. You know that the Lord is true. We will absolutely take care of you. And so they agreed to this, and she let him out of a rope in the window because she lived in the wall. Now, sometimes I saw some people describe how the wall probably had two sets of walls around it. She could have lived in the middle of the inner wall and the outer wall, so kind of two sets of rings around it. We don't know if necessarily that's true, but we do know a lot of cities that were big enough to have walls in that time frame, that kind of area. They did have double walls, so whether that is or not, it doesn't matter. But she did lived in the wall, so part of her house was, part of the wall of her house was the actual wall of Jericho. And so, but it's just interesting how the walls of Jericho fell down. So if they fall down, wouldn't it like kind of tear her house apart? I don't know. However, we know that they fell down later on in Joshua, but she let them down through a window that was made into the wall of her house, which also was the wall of Jericho. And she told them, she actually even gave them more instruction of how to get out there. She could have just said, hey, deal kindly with me, to get her own self out of trouble, and then let them go off, and then the pursuers would have caught them. But some of that faithfulness that she was applying really comes into the next few verses, because she says, hey, she let them down the rope in verse 16. And she said to them, go into the hills, or your pursuers will encounter you. You hide there 3 days until the pursuers have returned. Then afterwards you may go out. The men said to her, we will be guiltless with respect to the oath of yours that you have made with us. And so she actually even gave them a second, hey, by the way, if you just go straight back to your people, that's where the pursuers are going. They're going to encounter you. You're going to get caught. Go into the hills for 3 days, and then by that time, they'll go to the Jordans and the fords. They'll realize you're not there. They haven't seen you, and then they will come back, and in 3 days, you'll be fine to just go head on back. And so they decided to do this for them. They decided to, she decided that, she would tell them this information. It was good. And that also probably helped with their faith with her as well. And so, but they did say, look, by the way, if whenever this happens, you need to put something as a sign for us. And so behold, when we come into the land, in verse 18, Behold, when we come into the land, you shall tie this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and you shall gather into your house your father and your mother and your brothers and your father's household. And if anyone goes out of the doors of your household in the street, his blood shall be on his own hand, and we shall be guiltless. But if a hand is laid on anyone who is in with you in the house, his blood shall be on our heads. So they're letting her know. Look, here's one thing though. Whenever these walls fall, whenever we enter this city, there's going to be a lot of things that are happening. So you keep your people inside of your house at all times. If they go outside of your house, their blood's not on our hands. It's on their own, okay? But if you get into the house, you put that scarlet cord, we'll tell our leader, and no one will touch your house. However, if they leave, it's up to them, okay? And so he has given them a little bit disclaimer because they don't want to have the blood on their hands of people that ran out, in the hysteria. It's kind of a battle cry. Look, this is going to happen, okay? When we come to take over this land, and look at the just passion with them and the confidence that they're saying. Behold, when we come into the land, you shall talk, because they said, look, we're going to come in here. We will take this land over. So when we come into the land, tie this cord around around the post, and you'll be fine. And so they just wanted to make sure she knew that. And so, but then they went back, they departed and went into the hills and remained there for 3 days until the pursuers returned. The pursuers searched all along the way and found nothing. She actually did give them good information. They hid in the hills for 3 days. The pursuers did not find them. They made their way back. And then they went on to the Jordan. And they crossed over. They went back to Israel. And they told Joshua about everything they had done. It says in verse 24, and they said to Joshua, truly, the Lord has given all the land into our hands, and all the inhabitants of the land melt away because of us. And so they told him all that had happened. But just like Joshua and Caleb, if you remember in Numbers chapter 13 and 14, Joshua and Caleb were the only people that came back and said that. The other ones were like, oh no, these people are huge. There's no way we could take them over. But these two spies had the same kind of fighting spirit that Joshua and Caleb had. Look, guys, we can take these people. And Jericho was a fortified city. It was a built-up city. It had walls. But he said, you know what? No matter what, we can take this. And so we look at Rahab. She stepped into history. She stepped into the very lineage of Jesus herself and the King David and all the great people. And we see that she really changed her family dynamic and her family history. Once was a prostitute and now was one of the great grandmothers of the woman who would bear the Lord Jesus Christ himself. And so we look at this life. Decisions in our lives can make a difference. And so whatever God is telling you to do, if God is impressing upon you to do whatever, it could be new ministries options, it could be starting to share your faith with people, it could be getting out to the community and making connections with people, inviting people over for dinner or having coffee or doing whatever it is, making cookies and bringing to your neighbors. Whatever it is, if the Lord is telling you to do something, you never know what it could change about your life. You never know what the Lord could also then give you to do. He gave Rahab a little opportunity. Hey, I was faithful with your people. Could you be faithful with my family? And then all of a sudden, she is in the very lineage of Jesus Christ, King David as well. And so, whatever God's telling you to do, you need to do it today. Seek him, pray, read your word today. And next week, we'll talk about Joshua chapter 3. Have a good day.